Hello and welcome to section 10.1 of the book Transgender Ideology and Gender Dysphoria, a Catholic Response. The topic for this summary is of section 1 on heuristic. So if you've just found this, I'm doing sections of this book for discussion. I know it's a bit difficult, so it might be helpful then to have these YouTube videos. And if you want to just use the YouTube, that's fine. If you want the copy of the book, the description, the book is in the link below. This is now a response, right? So we've gone over general philosophy and philosophical approaches to sex and gender. We have introduced the medical science, the medical issues. We've looked at transgender youth, and now we are saying, well, what is the general response to this? What is, if you are a Catholic and you want to respond, what is the practical response? And well, here we are in the heuristic. So, in the beginning, I just kind of lay out some issues. Maybe it's not the best section for this, but it's bringing up some of the just general issues, right? Is this something that even needs to be addressed? Now, the medical stuff, the medical side of this will be addressed in 10.2. So I didn't go into all the medical issues with transitioning, but there are just social issues of just why. Is this something to be celebrated, or what's some of the challenges, right? And again, this might be better in a different section, but here it is. There was some studies done by Match.com, right, the dating website, and they found that 80% of LGBTQ individuals of the 1,000 surveyed were looking for relationships involving commitment. That's a good thing, right? People are looking for commitment, even in the LGBT community. Right? That 48% of the younger LGBTQ singles said that they eventually wanted children. So a lot of what is they might be they call it the ABC Mafia or something like that, the LGBT alphabet soup or what have you. But, it's not, this group is not a monolithic culture. And more often than not, what people who are LGBT ... are looking for is the same types of things that heterosexual people are looking for. They're looking overwhelmingly looking for a commitment, and more often than not looking for children, right? And if you would ask heterosexual young people, birth rates are way down. It might not be that much further away from 48% of them want children. So if this is where people are at within this community, what happens when you're transgender, right? Will you be in successful relationships? What is the outcome? And some of the worrying things have popped up in some of these surveys, and as you can tell, a lot of these surveys are things like Match.com or AdamandEve.com, right? These are dating websites, not Catholic resources or anything like this, or conservative resources by any stretch of the imagination. A 2016 survey found that 44% of lesbian, gay, bisexual individuals would not consider dating a transgender person, right? So 44% would not even consider it. Probably some people said they would consider it, were probably being nice, and when it came down to the particulars, probably wouldn't as well, right? So, if you're going to be transgender and you want to date, it's probably not. You're not going to have a lot of luck within the lesbian, gay, bisexual community, right? It's a struggle. Well, how about heterosexual people, right? Do they want to be in a relationship and have children with transgender people? Well, 12% of heterosexuals claim that they would be open to dating a transgender person, while 65% claim that they would never consider it, right? So if you're transgender, your chances of finding a relationship is tough, right? Your best chances would be within the gay and lesbian community, within the heterosexual community, much harder. Bryn Tannehill, who's a transgender activist, she says, most likely, those who are most likely to accept a transgender person is someone from the kink or BDSM communities, right? I know it's bondage, masochistic, so it's dealing with the fetishizing of the people. So there's probably plenty of people who will be willing to sleep with a transgender person. Far fewer who want to date, marry, and have children with a transgender person, right? This is some of the trouble, right? And even from within the transgender community, there's their own testimonies. All of these are coming from transgender people talking about their own experience of dating. Tannehill again says, from a transgender person's perspective, though, it can be disconcerting and dehumanizing to be treated more like a rare Pokemon that needs to be caught to complete someone's collection, right? Again, people would want to sleep with you in order to say they've done it, but it's not that they want to be in a relationship or build a family with a transgender person. Avery Edison, another transgender person, pointed out that on Tinder, he feels like I'm just an item to check off someone's sexual bucket list. Again, being used, but not interested in dating, right? This is not interested in anything serious, only something for a sexual exploration, right? So again, you say, well, there's a lot of straight men who want a trans girl. There's a lot of straight men who want to sleep with a trans girl. Very different than a lot of straight men who want to marry a trans girl, right? This is some of the challenge of this. One 43-year-old autogynephilic individual expressed her frustration. At this rate, I do not hold up much hope for finding my love. I've tried all the dating sites with not much success. I do actually feel at this point that it is highly likely I will live out my remaining days alone, despite being amazing, as my friends describe me. What I feel is amazingly lonely. Feel bad for a person who feels like this, right? Another person in an article was talking about their non-binary activist friends, and said a look was problematic, but I've already addressed a look in, I think, chapter 3. I'm sure I did. And Jacob's features haven't been softened by hormones, and they have a visible body hair that marks them as more obviously trans, so they have a much harder time. Non-binary femmes like them are too masculine for the straights and too feminine. I'm in the way too much. And too feminine for the gays, but out and too out for nearly everyone else. Right? And this was in an article said, why can't my famous gender non-conforming friends get laid, right? And they're not even looking for a relationship, they're just looking for sex and they can't find it. And if you see images of people like this, Alok or Jacob there, kind of hairy men, quite obviously men, beards and all of the male features, and then wearing like very tacky feminine clothes mixed with masculine elements, just to be, very out there, right? Out there as I'm non-conforming, I'm non-binary, I'm an individual, right? But what's the consequence of appearing in women's clothing and a giant beard and to the obvious onlooker, what they look like is they look like homosexual men who are just over the top. That's how they appear. They appear, they are clearly effeminate men, but with all of this beards and body hair, and wear a low-cut shirt, but with all the black hair coming out of the chest line and no breast, right? It's just the question is, who does that naturally attract? Not heterosexual men who don't want to date a man. If you're a gay man, why do you want to? If you like men, why would you want somebody who's wearing a dress? And thing is, if you're a gay man, you like men, not men dressed like women during the day. If you're right, it's just it's very confusing to people, and it just turns people off, right? So you can say, well, I'm an individual. Well, that's wonderful, right? But as that previous person said, you might be amazing, but you're going to end up amazingly lonely, right? And the part of the response from the gender activists is, well, if you're not willing to date someone like these people, you're a transphobe. But attraction and interest and desire and the parts that play into human attraction are intricate and deep. And you could say, well, my mind is a female. Oh, that's lovely, but the first thing I encounter is a male, right? The first thing I encounter is a male body. The phenomenology, right? The physicality in front of me is of a male body. I cannot see your feminine mind, right? I can't, or your non-binary mind. And there's immediately attraction or not attraction to people, and you can't, by guilt or by law, dictate who people are attracted to. That doesn't work. People are either attracted or not attracted, and if they're not attracted, they probably won't go much further down that line of dating, right? You're not even going to ask the person out on a date if you're not attracted to them, most likely, right? You can say, well, when you get to know them, that's fine. It's very idealistic. In the real world, we first encounter people with our senses, and then it inquires us to go deeper, right? But if you're immediately turned off with your senses, you probably won't go much deeper, right? And there's always exceptions to that rule. But if you're talking about millions of people, there are not exceptions to the rules for millions of people. It's going to be more difficult. Some of the response, what's the response that we should have? Again, we get into this in far more detail. This is kind of just a very loose overview. At this point, it's kind of the preamble to this chapter. But, the church is against this idea of the normativity of desire. Now, I'm not sure if anyone's used that before. I should look that up. Let me see. Yeah, I didn't invent that term. So normativity of desire is out there. But this idea that, what we desire is what we ought to do, right? This is this idea of normativity of desire. If I desire it, then therefore it is natural and good, right? So sometimes with some of the arguments people make about sexual orientation or something like this, well, I very naturally desire this, therefore it is good. Well, there's a lot of things we naturally desire which are not good for us, right? This is an age-old argument, right? And the church is just against this idea of saying, well, I desire to be a man, therefore I am a man, right? Or I desire to be a woman, therefore I am a woman, and this is good and I should be proud about this. Well, just because you desire something, what does that mean in terms of morality or in terms of epistemology or ontology? Desire means nothing, right? It's concupiscence. That's all we're talking about here. Now, Father Dan Horan, which I believe is the Duns Scotus chair, he's quite radical. Some people read the book say, who on earth is this guy? He's a Franciscan. He absolutely rejects and hates Thomism. And I've mentioned him before already in the past. But he wrote, "It is one thing to admire the old centuries idea for its own sake," and he's talking about Thomism. It's another thing to deploy that idea as a means of dehumanizing and dismiss whole populations of people. He sounds just like the gender theorist, right? If you don't fully agree with me 100% of the time on everything I say, then it means you're dehumanizing, you're dismissing whole populations of people, right? My response to this is that the digital form of this book is 800 pages. My 800-page response, Thomistic response to the transgender issue, is not dismissing whole populations of people. It's taking it quite seriously, right? What's dismissing is saying, oh, trans, yeah, that's fine, everything's great, right? Okay, we'll move on, right? A 2-page response is dismissive, right? It's just, if you don't agree with my perspective, then you're dismissing it or you're dehumanizing it. Thomism is about realism, right? And integration of the sciences and philosophy and art and culture and the human person, right? Thomism is a synthesis of everything, right? So it takes a lot of work to do Thomism. But it produces an authentic response, right? A pastoral response that's worthy of its weight, right? Worth its volume. Franciscans, not to pick on modern day Franciscans, but they are notoriously unthinking people. They just, I know that's very mean to say, but when I studied out in Berkeley, California, I studied at the Dominican school. We also had the Jesuit school, and there was the Franciscan school. We said, well, the Jesuits are quite smart, but often wrong. The Dominicans, they might not be very nice about it, but they're always right. And the Franciscans, well, they're nothing. Right? They have a big heart. They'll be wonderful pizza delivery drivers, someday, because their theology is just about feelings, and there's no authentic substance to it. It's unsubstantive, the modern Franciscan approach, which is not worthy of Bonaventure, who is worthy of reading, right? Is worthy as a Thomist and St. Thomas and Bonaventure are equals in their greatness, right? The Franciscans have abandoned Bonaventure. Another piece that's very important here, probably should have had its own slide, but it's the part about judgment. And people bring this up a lot, right? Even some of my book reviews, people who didn't really even read my book, they kind of glanced through it and gave a summary. They say, well, how about judge not lest you be judged? Well, I bring this up in the introduction, I bring it up in chapter 3, and I'm bringing it up again chapter 10. So I brought it up 3 times, the idea of judging. It is clearly an issue, right? Judge not lest ye be judged, Matthew 7:1, right? You cannot ignore that. It's very important, right? He who is without sin cast the first stone. Pull the plank out of your own eye before you pull the splinter out of your brother's eye. Right? This is over and over again, right? This is very important in the gospel. However, St. Thomas, when he talks about these sections of the scriptures, what he points out is that if you're talking about equals within society, right? If I go to Starbucks and the barista there is transgender, what is my responsibility to correct the transgender barista? No responsibility. I have no authority. I have no... we are equals as members of the society. What's my proper response to that person? Friendship, right? And the easygoingness of society, right? The amicability of society, right? Not to create a contentious environment, but a friendly environment, right? One that's open and welcoming, right? What should be my response? How you doing today? Oh, it's nice to see you. What have you been up to? Friendliness, right? That is the proper response when you encounter someone who's your equal. You work in an office, somebody else works in an office, they're transgender, or they have a transgender family member. What's your response? Friendliness, right? This has been lost a little bit with Catholics. The proper approach is friendliness, right? That is judge not, right? However, now here's on the other hand, people who are in authority are in authority for the purpose of making proper judgments, right? What is the role of a politician? To make proper judgments and to execute proper judgments on behalf of the civil society. What is the job of the clergy? To make proper judgments for the ecclesiastical community and to exercise judgment and action on behalf of the ecclesiastical community. So what's the point of the authority of a parent? To execute judgment and proper command over the family unit, right? So we have these different structures that we live in within society that are hierarchical, right? In school we have a hierarchy, in work we have a hierarchy, government, church, all of these things we have a hierarchy where there's people who are in authority. Now, some people are more in authority over some parts of our lives than others. So when you go to work, the person is not in authority over your family life. They're only in authority over your work life, right? This makes sense. The church has authority over your soul, right? And getting you there, right? Taxes and other stuff like this is not really the proper venue, right? That would be a civil issue that the government has control over, right? And likewise, the government doesn't have control over your soul, and they should leave that to the ecclesiastical authority. All of it should be aiming at human flourishing. However, they should be, respecting each other's valid authority, which God has given to each institution. So therefore, who are we to judge in terms of transgender? This very much depends, right? If you are a parent, it is your job to judge and make the best decisions for your children, which includes issues of transgender, right? Whether somebody in your family is claiming they're transgender, or just how to introduce your children to the idea of this, or how to address it. This is under your authority as a parent, right? If you are the school administrator and there's a transgender, you might have jurisdiction over certain issues, particularly locker rooms and bathrooms and things like this, or what we're going to call the child and how we're going to communicate to the parents about this, right? This is a big deal now with, do you keep secrets from the parents of the children, right? This seems like a usurping of power, right? They don't have the authority to do that. So all this to say, those who are in the authority to judge in certain situations must judge, right? This is your duty to judge. In other situations, you must not judge, right? And St. Thomas says it's a usurpage of power, right, for you to do it. For you to take somebody else's authority and take it in as your own is a usurping of power, which is invalid, right? It's an invalid and it's immoral to usurp someone else's power, authority, right? So this is very important, right? And another piece of this is if any of these valid forms of authority do not stand up and take the reins and exercise their authority, there will be others who are very willing to usurp that power and take it over, right? Gender theorists, for example, will have no problems filling the void you leave when you don't exercise your valid authority. Right? If you don't, they'll step right up, right? If you feel embarrassed, right? The church isn't going to talk about it. Others will, right? And it'll be on TikTok, and right? If you don't talk to your children, somebody else will, right? So it's the proper execution of authority which is important. Now, I bring up in this section this idea of a heuristic, and I still ponder if this was the best thing or even worthy of bringing up, but I've gone down this road and I'm sticking with it, so feel free to disagree. But a heuristic is, coming from the Greek, serving to find out or discover, right? That's the idea of a heuristic, and I'm using it as a pastoral model, and I think that it makes some sense. So in a heuristic, there's 3 steps. There's the searching for information. Once you've gathered enough information, you have to know when to stop gathering information. and then to make a decision, right? If you never stop and you keep looking for more information, you'll never make a decision, right? And that's not helpful. So you have to know when enough information is enough information, right? This is the searching, stopping, decision making for a heuristic. So as a model, and we'll break this down more. Prudence also has a very similar three-step process, right? Good counsel, which is, again, gathering information, making a judgment, and then executing the judgment, right? Very similar, right? Good counsel, to make a judgment is a stop, right? Stop. This is my judgment, right? And then you need to enact it, right? So that's part of prudence. Pope Francis, in another way, very similar, says, we must meet people, right? We must meet people where they're at and to listen to their stories, right? We must gather information from who they are, listen to them, this synodal process. Then we must accompany them along their journey, right? It's accompanying them in truth, and then proclaiming the gospel, right? Maybe a bit of a stretch, but I think it's still kind of this three-step approach, right? Gather information, stop, make a judgment, and enact what you have to do. It sounds very basic, right? So it's not that controversial, this idea of a heuristic. We'll get into different types of heuristics. I think Pope Francis's line applies very well here. I ask you, be shepherds with the odor of the sheep, right? I think this is a big part of the heuristic model. It's a big part of prudence. It's a big part of Pope Francis, right? You listen, you gather information, you accompany, you're getting your hands dirty in the midst of this community. We're not judging from ivory towers. We're in the midst of it. And then we judge and command, right? This is proper authority, right? If you're in a position of making authority. Again, a transgender barista at your Starbucks is not somebody who you apply any of this to, right? You can search and listen, you can meet, but you're not proclaiming or commanding anything. Now, there are two types of heuristics, and I think this is the important part of bringing up a heuristic, because we naturally do it anyway. There's availability heuristic, and then there's base rate heuristic, and this is very important. So availability heuristic is when we gather an example, right? We've searched, we've got the information, we stop, and we make a decision, right? We make a command. But it's based on what has been available to us. So if we think back, I think back to my past, the transgender people who I was aware of 20 years ago were often people who were very obviously men. They looked very obviously like men, very unconvincingly dressing as women, and usually with some type of mental health issues as well, right? And we would be very nice and call them whatever they wanted to be called, and we treated people with dignity because that's the nice thing to do, right? To respect people, love people, meet them where they are, and treat them with dignity. These people had no power, they had no agency. There was no benefit in doing anything that other than being loving and kind to them, because when they weren't with you and they were just out in the general public, they were probably going to be facing even more opposition, right, from the general public. So at least what we could do as good Christian people would be to show a loving hand, a sense of loving. But if I use this image of the few transgender people who I knew about 20 years ago, and I have now judged all transgender people based on my experience of two transgender people, let's say, right? Well, I met two transgender people. Yeah, well, based on my experience of two, sample size of two, I now have made a judgment about everyone, right? Some people do this with immigrants or something like that, right? There's a story of an immigrant who killed an American citizen. Therefore, we have a very negative opinion about all immigrants, right? Say, well, I can give you 10 examples of immigrants who did terrible things. Okay, but there are millions of immigrants, so 10 examples is not actually a very accurate sample size, right? It's not a very accurate sample size. But this is often how we make our decisions in the world, right? We make our decisions based on availability heuristics, right? A certain set of experiences. We have now judged the entire situation based on those few experiences, and now this is our conclusion, right? Racism or anything, sexism often deals with things like this, right? Bad experience with a certain number of black people, therefore you think all black people are like something. The failure in this heuristic is you did not keep searching until you had a proper amount of information to make a judgment, right? You stopped searching too soon, right? If you stopped searching after you met 2 black people, you did not search enough, right, to get a good understanding of black people, right? So maybe it's not possible to even categorize black people as a group in certain circumstances, in terms of morality, for example, right? You can't say, well, black people are more moral, less moral, just like everyone else, right? You might make statements about some things culturally, or, there are cultural stereotypes, but in terms of things like morality or intelligence, right, that you can't, no matter how many examples you have, it doesn't make any sense because there's no correlation between race and intelligence or something like that. So why use a heuristic? Well, I think it's important for us to be aware that we already are using a heuristic. We already are using a availability heuristic. We should be using a base rate heuristic. Now, a base rate heuristic looks at the numbers, it looks at the data, it looks at the averages. It gets enough information to make an educated decision, right? When we go into the ocean, we're often terrified of sharks, right? And the odds of getting attacked by a shark is so incredibly small that you should be far more concerned about the cancer from the sun, right, than you should be concerned about the shark, right? So if you use a base rate heuristic, you would say, well, this is my odds of getting eaten by a shark. And you look at it and you go, well, there's basically no odds of me getting eaten by a shark, so I'm not going to worry about that. What are my odds of dying from eating all these potato chips? Look at the numbers, right? And you make decisions based on reality, right? This is realism. That's why base rate heuristics are helpful. It's also why, it's a problem with our education system a little bit, like when you show somebody a map and say, well, where is Nigeria? And they can't find it on a map. Oh, okay, it's understandable. You might not know where Nigeria is, right? If you look at a map, you might say, well, it's either this country or this country. But the problem in our culture is you show somebody a map of the world and say, where's Nigeria? And they point to South America, right? not even close. Find Europe on a map and they point to Australia, right? There's one thing not being able to differentiate Belgium from the Netherlands. It's another thing to not be able to find a continent, right? Or if you ask people a math problem, that maybe you can't get the number exactly right, but you should know a ballpark, right? What's 10 times 10, right? You might not know it's 100, but you shouldn't think it's 10,000, right? Right. So, base rate heuristics, again, it takes in enough information to know something about it. So everything I've pointed up to this point has really been building on this idea of a heuristic, right? Understand epistemology, understand culture, understand sex, understand gender, understand biology, understand the philosophy, understand and where the science is saying, understand, right? This is why it's 800 pages long, is to build up a body of information so we are not judging people based on stereotypes or straw men, but using the best information we could get up to this moment to make good decisions, right? This is why all of this information is so important and it's so voluminous that nobody would want to read it. Another reason why I think the heuristic model is useful is the 12-step program is a heuristic model, right? It's the steps that you use, you go get this far, next do this, next do this, next do this. It's a helpful thing, because heuristics acknowledge that you will not know all of the information on the planet, but it knows when to stop. Like, how much information do you need to know? Okay, I got enough information for this. Stop, act, right? Next, right? So, for example, with the AA, what wrongs have you done, and amend the wrongs you have done. Okay, let's go through and make a list of the wrongs I've done. Stop. Fix the harm that was done, right? That's part of the process, right? It can be helpful. Again, maybe this isn't as helpful for some people, but I did make these heuristic steps for the different groups. I started with just adults, and I thought I need it really for the youth, and then we got two different types of youth. So we have these 3 heuristics I've created. Nothing all that difficult, but you start with good counsel, right? So early onset gender dysphoria, this is when people express themselves as transgender before they've hit puberty. The evidence shows that 63 to 84% of transgender youth, people who have gender dysphoria as youth, they desist, right? So with that being the case, the good counsel would be not to rush, right? If the majority of the children will desist, then you wait and see, and you don't do anything, right? You listen, right? And you keep the lines of communication open, and you show support, right? And that's the good counsel. That's what the good counsel says. You make a judgment. Says, only under the scarcest medical circumstances should hormone blockers or cross-sex hormones be given to anyone whose brain has not finished developing to Tanner stage 5, right? This is the advice that, if your brain is still being formed as a teenager, it makes no sense to stop the process of masculinizing and feminizing the brain when it hasn't, when you're not done naturally doing this, right? I'd say only under the scarcest medical conditions. You could even say it probably should never be done, right? You wait, right? It's a wait. And then the command is the advice of Bishop Carlson. Listen, keep the channels of communication open. We can sympathize with their feelings without capitulating to their desires. It is important to not to leave them feeling alone. That's the action that's taken. So if you have a transgender child, gender dysphoric child, what do? You wait, you're patient, and follow the advice of Archbishop Carlson. Right. That is the best approach when young children present. How about when teenagers, right? Late onset gender dysphoria. People who have shown no signs of being gender dysphoric, and then all of a sudden at 14, 15, they're coming out as gender dysphoric. Well, looking at Dr. Lippman's study, is very high likelihood of this being a social contagion that will, if you don't go down the medicalized approach, if you don't start transitioning them, they will probably very naturally desist from this. It is very likely a trend, right? This is the good counsel of Dr. Lippman and others. As a judgment, parents should inform themselves about the conditions to obtain an understanding of the experience of transgender people, demonstrate shrewd judgment, and trust in their instincts. Consider if this is a latent diagnosis or an early onset gender dysphoria, or is this ROGD. Also follow the advice from before, right, for early onset gender dysphoria. Right. Right. Parents need to make themselves educated on this, because the kids reading a Reddit site all day long about this and saying, this is me, this is me. Well, if you don't know anything about this, then how are you going to lead your child, right? You need to be informed with making proper judgments, right? But listen to good counsel, not activists, right? Gender activists are not the proper counsel you need. They won't help you make the proper judgments. And the command is exactly the same. Listen, keep the channels of communication open. We can sympathize with their feelings without capitulating to their desires. It is important not to leave them feeling alone, right? When they are 18 and they are no longer under your house, if they decide to make this decision, that's one thing, but we don't aid them in their own self-destruction, right? We don't help them to do this, right? And for adulthood, right, older adults, now this is the original one and it's even longer than the others, right? What if you have a Caitlyn Jenner situation, right? Somebody who's older in life, they're making their own decisions, but you have some type of authority as a pastor or a therapist or counselor, social worker, right? Administrator of some kind. Well, we see this in Male and Female, He Created Them, the document from 2019. And the good counsel that they point out is we should listen to medical professionals who can make the proper medical determinations, right? This is the approach of the council, right? And this is helpful, I think, right? Male, female, He created them. It says, when a person's sex is not clearly defined, medical professionals can help make the therapeutic intervention. In such situations, parents cannot make an arbitrary choice on these issues, let alone society. So this is what the church was saying, and not with absolute authority, but it's a document of coming from the Vatican on education. I think we have changed a little bit from this, to be honest. This was published in 2019, so it was written before 2019. I think we have more reasons than in before to be skeptical of the medical professionals, right? I think the advice is listen to the medical professionals, but you need to find good medical professionals, right? Most of them have drunk the Kool-Aid at this point, and they're not going to give you good advice. So, I don't know. You have to find the good professionals, and I think it's worth listening to a variety of voices, right? If you want to listen to Johanna Olsen Kennedy, go ahead, but I would listen to somebody else as well, right? That's for sure. Proper judgment, the treatment should aim to restore the natural order, right? This is a very important part. Restoring the imago Dei, right, the image of God. Treatment should also be the least invasive possible, which is very tied into the natural order, right? So what's the point of these surgeries? To return what was lost by some type of deformity, right? So same thing that happens with intersex, right? What do you try to do? You try to restore whatever binary sex they feel most comfortable, right? The one that they should have been, right? Trying to just simplify it, right? The command, there must be patience and acceptance of oneself, especially when born imperfectly, right? This idea that you're unhappy in this life, well, this is the human condition, right? And we'll get into this. We're breaking down each of these in the next chapter. So, yeah, this is the human condition. So don't confuse the human condition with a disorder, right? A specific gender disorder. And lastly, the command, due to our fallen nature, we need to depend on the grace of God, right? And and God for ultimate happiness. It's the spiritual approach, right? It's not only the spiritual approach, right? Evangelicals can sometimes dominate the conversation, and it's just, well, just pray. Just God will overcome it. Well, we need to make proper judgments. We need scientific information. We need medical information. We need to restore the natural order, right? There's a lot more to it than just the spiritual, right? We are spirit and body, and we need to be aware of both realities. But we do have to acknowledge the spiritual is the higher guiding principle, right? So that's it for this. I know it's a bit of more of an introduction and a little scattered, but we're going to get into all of these things specifically as we move forward in the next section.